more of the course, the irregular terrain that's typical of sandy courses comes into play quite a bit more. Sandy soils tend to be dynamic soils. They've arrived where they are by way of wind, by way of water, and they've moved and eroded and resettled around. And as a result, you get some really interesting contouring. This is Rye in southern England, Great Links course. And as you can see, when you've got firm conditions and you're needing to land a ball 20, 30 yards short of that green, there's a lot to think about on that shot because you need to understand every one of those little wrinkles to get a ball to come close to that pin. And it's a great example of what I was talking about where it's very difficult to create that type of topography where it doesn't exist naturally. And even if you could, the challenge is that every one of those little dips and hollows, if you have heavy soils, they all turn into little bird baths, wet little sloppy places over time, anytime that it gets wet. When you've got sand, the water passes right through, and so it's possible to have all of these little imperfections and to preserve them in a way that you just can't on heavier soils. And then there's the ability to do really natural kind of bunkering. These are two bunkers, natural bunkers I passed on the roadside on my way to Sandhills, my first visit. Car pulled over in front of me and asked me what was wrong and whether I was having car trouble. I said, "What's wrong? Look at that. What are you talking about wrong?" The kind of bunkering that's possible when you have sandy soil to just work into is really something special. And you can see that it's not a long jump from something like this, which is occurring naturally, to something like that, which is just down the road at Sandhills. And basically the process for creating a bunker like that was to start with something like this, scratch away a bit of the grass, hollow it out a bit, and you had your bunker. The special thing about bunkers like this is that it's a lot easier to create these interesting dips, different landforms, different types of edges to allow clumps to kind of find their way down into the turf, into the sand, to allow little bits of turf to heal into areas. And the end product is a very kind of diverse and varied hazard. There's a lot of different stances and lies in that bunker. You may get the nice flat lie where you can play a reasonable shot from, but you may be underneath one of those clumps of grass or underneath a steep edge or 1 foot on the outside and 1 foot on the inside trying to figure out how you're going to hit your shot. And the ability to do that makes for more interesting hazard play. We talked a little bit at the beginning of the presentation or just before about how bunkers aren't a hazard for great golfers anymore, and in fact they'd rather be in a bunker than elsewhere. That's true to a certain extent, but I think that's in a large part because of the ideas of fairness that have come into modern bunkering. When you have a bunker like this, it is absolutely still a hazard, and it's not a place that anybody wants to be. And it's very hard to recreate this when you're not just working right into the natural sandy ground. To try to dig a shape like that into soil and then fill it with sand and have it work out with this kind of variety and this kind of complexity is basically impossible. And I know because I've tried, and we've never really succeeded in the way that we do on sandy ground when we can just work right into the natural soil. Then, of course, there's the wind. The fact of the matter is, as you guys are very well aware here, the wind and sand tend to go hand in hand because most of the time there's enough sand to build a golf course on. It was the wind that put it there. And so sandy courses tend to be windy courses. And when you've got that firm ground to begin with, the wind just accents the need to play the ground game and to land shots shorter of the greens, to work the ball along the ground more, to play the shots low, not just play kind of aerial golf. And again, that helps to bring more and more of the golf course into play. This is Royal Portrush, a hole called Calamity Corner, the 14th. So putting it all together, when you've got firm and fast conditions, irregular topography, the ability to create really interesting bunkers, and a healthy dose of wind, you basically have golf at its absolute best. But getting the most from these gifts requires attention to detail, and those are details large and small, from the routing right down to those small imperfections that we talked about in the photo at Rye. We'll go through a few of the kind of design and conditioning characteristics that really help make golf on sandy ground great. There's more in the book, but we'll go through kind of a few highlights now. Room to play is kind of at the foundation of, I think, all good golf to a certain extent. On sandy ground, I think it's essential. This is a photo of the old course at St. Andrews, and those of you that have been there, it's essentially a 100-yard wide fairway with kind of bunkers and rough dotted throughout, and for those of you that play a hook, you could probably hit a 50-yard hook all day long and never lose a ball. But at the same time, you'd never shoot any kind of a score there playing like that. And so room to play is really, it's what gives golfers the option to pursue different strategies on the course. If you don't have the room to play, there's no way to take a different route, because if every fairway is 20 yards wide, the only strategy to the course is to hit the ball straight. And the wider the course is, you're able to take advantage of all of these options that sandy ground gives you, to be able to play bump and run shots, to be able to use contours differently from different angles. Without that room to play, you don't have that. At the same time, room to play is a pretty important buffer for courses on sandy ground, because as you guys know, when things start to get windy, things start to get hard, all of a sudden, if a course is tight, it becomes unplayable really quickly. And so having that room makes courses like the old course, like Royal Dornoch, playable in all these different kinds of winds that you get. Different wind, different direction, different firmness of ground. It's the room to play that kind of enables that to happen. And it's something that can get lost. It's something where good players are going to tell a club that, you know, these fairways are too wide, it makes the course too easy, we need to tighten the course up. Well, for the good player, he shouldn't be worrying about what's going on 30 yards, 40 yards left of center. He ought to be worried about what's on the center line, and ought to be happy that the guy that's constantly 40 yards left of center is able to find his ball and keep moving and isn't out there in the rough looking around for it all day long. Because that guy's going to shoot a high enough score just being out of position. But enabling him to kind of find his way home is an important part of the game, and it keeps golf enjoyable for everybody. It allows the game to grow. And at the same time, it does let people pursue sort of different strategic angles. And I think that's something that sandy courses have always gotten right, is the understanding that the game needs to be accessible to a wider range of people, and that it needs to have that strategic interest of being able to play a course in different ways.